Professor Robert Thurman, Tashidele, welcome to London and this Londonney program. I have the pleasure of interviewing you and having you here with us for the next hour or so. Yeah.
Okay.
So our focus will be just on things and your relationship with Tibet, the Tibetans, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Okay, sure.
So I would like to first ask you what brought you to London this time, briefly about the things that you've done this past week.
Well, originally, my plan to come here this time, I was kind of, it was Mohini Kent Noon, Lady Mohini Kent Noon,
Yes.
came to Connecticut, near where I live in Woodstock, upstate New York, because I'm retired from Columbia, university teaching. And she came there and she proposed to me to come and visit the Parliament to celebrate His Holiness's 90th year, because although his birthday is past now, we're making the year of compassion. You know? And since I'm still responsible in some way for Tibet House US, which we call thus, we call THUS, naturally, we are trying to make a big fuss also, like everybody is, about His Holiness' 90th birthday. Although, as he says, we like it, what he says, that in all of the long life ceremonies that he goes to, he says to the Tibetans, please don't make such a big fuss.
Right.
And it's shugis, tegis, and a big fuss and he's always saying that. Because it's a little boring for him to have to sit there while they can bring in all the presents and they give it away and so on.
Yeah.
But of course, he loves their wonderful feeling and so on, and he's very happy. But it is a little bit boring. He likes to read his Uma and his sadhana triptaps. He likes to do, you know.
Right. So I understand you have known His Holiness the Dalai Lama over 61 years.
61 years, yes.
Could you tell us a bit about how you came to meet with His Holiness, your
Yes.
connection with Tibet and the Tibetans?
Yes. Well, I came to India in 1962. I dropped out of Harvard as a senior because I decided I wanted to attain enlightenment. And the Western people told us there's no such thing as enlightenment. And you just have to get your degree and go get a job. You know, listen, I didn't think that was that useful. And I felt I had the ability maybe somehow to understand life and the world. And I had a sense that Buddha Dharma would have that. And somewhere in India, there'd be like a yoga of the mind that would be better than Western psychology. So I went all the way to India. And then I had a job in India. I was given a job by Mrs. Beatty, if you remember her.
Right, of course.
To work in the Lama school in Dalhousie as an English teacher. And then I would be learning Tibetan and the Buddha Dharma from them. But then my father passed away in New York. So then my mother insisted I come back, and then I was going to come back to Dalhousie and I would be in that school. But while I was in New York, I just happened to go to New Jersey and I met a wonderful Geshe Kalmik gentleman, Denji Ledu Tsenemete, Geshe Wangyal, Ngawa Wangyal, who was a Gomang Geshe, who had been in Tibet for many years. He worked for Sir Charles Bell at one time. He had quite a history. He was a student of Dorjeev, Kempo Dorjeev, who was the 13th Dalai Lama's ambassador to the Tsar. So he had a kind of relation, and he had a relationship with Gyalo Dundrup and Losang Samden, and you know, in the guerrilla warfare time and so on. And because he was in America since the 50s, invited by the Mongolians.
He read an important message when His Holiness was
Yes.
in flight.
And he, at that time, he had, what had happened was I was in New York, I was about to fly back to India, and then I went to a Zen center, and I saw a sign that said, Lama's monastery, they have some lamas, we need English teacher, and blah, blah. So I didn't think I would work there or anything, but I thought I'd go, maybe they have friends in Dharamsala or Dalhousie, I would visit there. So, but when I met him, he had somehow karma, you know, an impact. So then I sold my ticket to come back and study with him. And then he taught me Tibetan language, and Geshe Sopa was there.
Oh,
Kundu Sopa, and Sherpa Tulku, Kamlung Tulku, and one Sakyapa, Kunga Tardze. And they were my English pupils.
Oh,
Geshe
okay.
Sopa, who later was in
Right,
Wisconsin,
yes,
he was
he's
my
very
English
famous,
student.
yes.
But then I quickly learned Tibetan because I really liked it, and I really liked Buddhism. And then I was really a pest. I wanted to debate with Geshe Sopa all the time, so I was annoying him. I didn't really know how to debate, but I did speak Tibetan very quickly. So anyway, then I was determined I was going to be a monk.
Uh-huh.
And the Geshe Wangya said, no, you're not going to be a monk because there's no monastery for Americans in New York. And you didn't come here to be a monk. You weren't living here. You're American, so better you do something else. But I kept pestering him. So then finally, that was in late 62 and early 63. So then I studied with him until late 64. And then he said, well, I have to go to India to report to His Holiness about the education of Sherpa and Kamlung and Kunga and so on. And then also I have to take some money for those Mongolian monks because they don't get a normal salary from Indian government. They're considered Russian or something, Buryats, and so on. So I have to go help them. He had a little money he would take to them. So he said, and so since you're insisting on being a monk, maybe His Holiness Dalai Lama will consider you to be a monk. You can go and study there, he said.
And what was your thought then?
What's that?
What was your thought when Geshe Wangya suggested you go to see
Well,
His
then he
Holiness to
took me
become
there.
a monk?
And then we went to Sarnath, and His Holiness was just giving a speech to the World Fellowship of Buddhists. And then I met him in the guest house there, and I did bowing to him. And then Geshe Wangya said, this crazy American boy is very smart, and he loves Buddhism, and he speaks Tibetan already, and he wants to be a monk. So I'm bringing him to Your Holiness. And then he made me very mad because he said, but Your Holiness, my advice is don't make him a monk. He said, so I'm like, what do you mean you brought me? He said, you make me a monk. And I was telling him, don't make me a monk. But anyway, His Holiness didn't pay that much attention to that. And then he said, well, I'll teach him. He can come to Dharamsala if he wants to study. And so then I went up to Dharamsala with His Holiness. And then I used to meet His Holiness quite often in Swargashram in those days. He was not in the current residence at all.
Right.
They had Mortimer Hall still there. I think I stayed in Mortimer Hall, or I forget where I was. I think in Mortimer Hall there was one room. Kulyusha was there, and actually Kulyusha lent me his dagam because it was very cold. In those days there was more snow and the colder weather in Dharamsala in the winter, and I love that dagam. I'll never forget the dagam. To stay warm.
You've met all the giants of...
What's that?
You have met all the giants of Tibetan personalities.
Yes, at
from the
Tibetan
early
Buddhist
days.
and the old, and especially I had strong affinity with Lingam Rinpoche, Lingtang, Chapje Lingtang Rinpoche, and I used to visit him a lot. And then His Holiness, I think I was the second Westerner who was pretty fluent in Tibetan. Since Heinrich Hauer, actually. I don't think he'd really had any Westerner who could really speak Tibetan. So then he was downloading he had questions about Sigmund Freud and about this and that. He might have been a little disappointed with me because I was a more literature person, not a scientist. And he was always interested in science. But psychology I knew quite well. And I wasn't very good at nuclear physics in those days. And so he would deflect my questions about Buddhism and he would say, go to ask Lingam Rinpoche, or he would, Gyabala, they used to call the Kimbo of the Namgyal Monastery at that time, they would call him Gyabala. I actually don't remember his name. Maybe Losan Dundub or something, I can't remember his name, personal name. But Gyabala, they used to say, there was a beard, he had a beard. He was a Kamba, I think, and he had a beard. So then they said, Gyabala, you ask Gyabala. They would send me to study with him. And then he was reviewing whether I really wanted to be a monk. And then eventually, Lingam Rinpoche gave me the Getsu. And then finally, His Holiness included me. I was in the same batch of Gelongs with Tenzin Gyatso.
Oh, wow.
Tetong. So we were fellow monks. So then years later, when Tenzin Gyatso ran away to get married in Darjeeling, I happened to be there in India, so then His Holiness was kind of mad, maybe because we had a lot of conversation that year, 1980, or 79, 80. It was a sabbatical year I had. And maybe His Holiness thought that I encouraged Tenzin Gyatso to run away. Because he had wanted to run away for a few years. He told me, get Tenzin Gyatso. But then somehow my being there encouraged him, because His Holiness still met with me. We were still friends, in other words. But so that's why we became kind of, at that time, I didn't really think of His Holiness as my guru. I more or less thought of him. I did go to some wands, but I wasn't paying attention to Tantra. I was really more into Uma, and Sema, logic and philosophy. And I did some chuptaps, I did some kandan, but kandan tosang, but I didn't really think much about yoga.
Do you think His Holiness was reluctant to convert people of other faith into Buddhism, because he still advises people not to
Yes,
really
well, he
convert?
didn't do it right away. They didn't do it right away. They spent about 6 to 8 months of getting to know me before they actually gave me the Getso. And Ling Rinpoche was the one who conferred the Getso on me, which is the novice ordination. And then His Holiness did the Gelong. But he didn't seem too reluctant, because we were kind of pals by that time, a little bit. And I must say that the officers didn't like me, because His Holiness loved talking. We had lots of fun. We talked and we gossiped, and also he asked me a lot of questions about Western culture. And I had to make up words in Tibetan for things like the id and the ego and the, do you know what I mean, the Western psychology and sort of the Constitution, the American Constitution, this sort of thing. He was very interested in everything about the West.
Yeah, very curious.
And so then His Holiness would cancel some other meeting they had scheduled, and he would have them bring tea, and he would keep me longer. And so they were kind of annoyed with me a little bit, I think.
Would you say like those days in Dharamsala was instrumental in the formation of you as an adult, later life as an academic for Indo-Tibetan Buddhist studies, for which you also received Padma
but I
Shri?
didn't really know, because I wasn't paying much attention to that, because I was determined to be a lifelong monk. I was very sincere about it. In fact, I lived with Jaya Rinpoche after I left there, and I studied medicine, actually. My Mongolian teacher insisted that I study with Yishi Danden, who was refounding the new Menzikang. He was reestablishing Menzikang. Later, he was no longer, he had his own independent clinic, but he was the one who refounded Menzikang at first for His Holiness, and he was His Holiness's personal physician for many years at that time. And I learned how Zatayana Sopa. I learned how to do that. And Loche Rinpoche, your Rinpoche, name, he was the student of Ling Rinpoche. So I kind of, at one point I spent some time at Ling Labang, also up on the hill, and with Loche Rinpoche, and I got to know him very well at that time. So that's how I can remember your name very well. I can call you Loche Rinpoche.
Thank you. You've been very lucky to have received teaching personally from those great masters of Tibet, and being there in those early days. And then I heard His Holiness advised you to set up Tibet House in New York.
Yeah, that was much more later.
Tell us about
so
that.
then, anyway, then when I got back to States, I went with Kyona Rinpoche. I went on a kind of embassy to Argentina, because the government in exile, which they didn't call it CTA in those days, it actually was government in exile. And also the Indian officer in Tibet who was in Dharamsala, who was relating to the government exile, he was from foreign office, not from the domestic office. So nowadays CTA goes with domestic. But at that time they were treating government in exile as a real government in exile in a way. It was very interesting, that change, And but anyway, so then they sent me, because I also speak Spanish. I had lived as a teenager in Mexico. And so, although I was rusty in Spanish, but anyway, I went with Kyona Rinpoche and Kushal Kyona to Buenos Aires. And then I was staying in New Jersey again with Geshe Wangyal. And during that time, I sort of began to realize that the old Mongolian, in a way, was more wise than me, in the sense that I didn't mind being a monk, actually. I rather liked it. I had been married, I married very young and had a daughter, and the ex-wife was around, but and I could see my daughter a little bit, but I wasn't missing family life. But what I noticed was that Westerners thought I was kind of crazy or something.
Yeah,
So I didn't have respect. And I was very anxious that they learn about Buddhism because for me it was my life. And I realized that, and the Geshe had told me, well, it's better you become professor. And as a monk, they see you with a red robe, shaved head.
Right.
And those days they didn't even have hippies, This was early 60s, mid 60s. Hippies only came like 67, 68.
Right.
So 65, there weren't even, those Hindu, Krishna types. There were no Krishna people running around. So I began to realize that I was out of sync with the American culture. And I couldn't represent Tibetan cause or Buddha Dharma. I was not so much interested in the politics. I didn't really understand about I must admit, I think I was a little insensitive about the Tibetan plight. But I could feel it also from Tibetans. In other words, Tibetans liked me because I was speaking Tibetan, and they liked even that I liked Buddhism. But on the other hand, I could a little bit read their mind, like, well, he's an American, and why doesn't he have a gun? Help us get free from Chinese, In other words, because I wasn't involved in it. I was, well, let's all become enlightened, like, I wasn't like, let's save Tibet from China, you know what I mean? I didn't get it, because I was just seeking enlightenment. So, but I began to, then I was back in States at Geshe Wangyal's monastery. And I didn't really, Geshe Wangyal wouldn't allow me to learn Mongolian.
Oh.
So I wasn't serving like a priest for the Kalmyk community. And the young lamas had kind of left. They went off to different schools, and some of them went back to Dharamsala. So I didn't really have a job, in a way, except I was going on studying memorizing Tibetan texts. And then one night I was up late memorizing Sema Namgyal. And I was repeating, like those Tibetan young lamas do.
We used to do that as a
So Geshe Wangyal came and he said, what are you doing? You're staying up all night doing memorizing. I said, well, what do you mean I'm memorizing that? I want to take Geshe exam. I want to be Geshe. Right. And then he said to me, do you know anybody who wants a white Geshe? He said that. And that was like a shock. Because of course, Tibetan doesn't want to study with an American Geshe. In those days. They want to study with Tibetan Geshe. Actually, even today. I mean, where there's a Rinpoche and there's somebody who's been 3-year retreat even, they don't want to learn. The other Westerners want to learn with the Rinpoche, not the 3-year retreat even. Even though they're supposed to be Buddha, they took 3-year retreat. The Westerner doesn't acknowledge, actually. So anyway, I started learning that. So then I realized, I have to give up my robes, So then Geshe Wangyal, he wouldn't accept. He said, I didn't give you a robe. You have to give them back to Dalai Lama.
Oh.
So, but then I wrote a letter, because I couldn't have the money to go to India again. So then I went and I finished my degree at Harvard, and then I got a PhD and became professor. And during that time, of course, I fell in love with someone. Unfortunately, not my previous wife. I fell in love with another lady, and this kind of made my ex-wife kind of mad. She didn't mind me being monk, but when I had started a new family, that got me in trouble. So anyway, so then I've been like a professor. Then I went back I finally got a grant as a graduate student to do a dissertation on Lake Shinim, because I love Tsongkhapa. I'm a very Tsongkhapa. I didn't think of myself as Gelugpa, but I really liked Jaden Buche as philosopher and as a teacher. I really did. And so then I went back. And by the way, when I then met His Holiness again in 1970 and then again in 78, I didn't see him for a while because I was working so much.
Right. And then also His Holiness started traveling abroad.
He finally started,
especially to the US.
But when it really changed our relationship, although the greatness of His Holiness is we still have kind of our old pal relationship. you know, and he teases me and so
yes.
forth. And I sometimes talk back a little bit to him because we have like that
I saw that
fellow
dynamic.
student, you know.
Right.
And I kind of, we have that sometimes, but especially by the mid and late 70s, I think he kind of came into his bigger power as a Lama, and he, you know, Kala Chakra, you know, initiation and different kinds of initiations, and then he really became like my root guru, because the old Geshe Wangyal always used to say, "I'm not your guru, I'm your Kalyana Mitra, your Gewe Shenyan, but not your Lama," because he said, "I will criticize you, and then you'll be angry with me, and that'll be big sin for us. So I'm your Gewe Shenyan, your instructor, you know, like, but not your guru, you know, because Lama, you can't get angry with your Lama." So anyway, so then His Holiness really, since the 70s, he's become my super Lama, actually. But on the other hand, I think the greatness of His Holiness is what I call flexibility of identity based on Dangme. Dangme Tokwe Sherab. And because of that, he isn't, you know, he isn't always on a pedestal. He doesn't, you don't have to always like, always bow down. In fact, I can tell a funny story, people will laugh. In 1980, when I was then, by that time, professor, you know, and I took all my family and whole children to Dharamsala. I was for a year in Nizamuddin and also Dharamsala. And then when we left back to the States at the end of 1 year, I wanted to show the younger children how you treat Lama. So my wife told me, "Oh, don't do that. His Holiness hates formality." So I went to sort of exit interview, you know, with the whole family. We'd been working on some projects, so I had met him lots of times. But then we went for exit interview. So I said to my wife, "I'm going to formally bow, then the children will see me bow, and they'll really realize how you have to be with Lama." You know, like, and my wife said, "Don't do that. His Holiness doesn't like it," and so forth. So then I come in, and I'm starting to bow, and His Holiness pretends that he thought I was going to shake hands. So as I'm trying to bow, he grabs my hand, and so of course I fall over.
Oh my
And
God.
flop on the floor.
That's a real bow.
So the children think that's what's going on. And they have the greatest time, and they all flop on the floor. And everybody's laughing and sort of breaking the ice.
Right, right.
And so it's like, it was wonderful, actually. And then, of course, my wife is, "I told you so." No.
Yeah, we could see the close rapport you share with His Holiness in some of the videos that we can see on the Tibet House US website. He was there for the inauguration, and we could
Yes,
see the
absolutely.
very young Richard Gere,
Yes.
you and your children,
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
so many others. And also there was this interview that you did with His Holiness at Harvard. So there's a lot of
way back,
information
yes.
about that on your website.
Actually, His Holiness always like that. Like when I first introduced him at Harvard, his first speech at Harvard in '79, in the first year, when I introduced him, I made a big fuss about Avalokiteshvara and I don't know what. And so, because I was trying to be as reverent and respectful as possible, introduce his amazing what he is, like, you know, like practically like Jesus. So, and then he comes up to give the talk, and I'm coming back from the introduction, you know, because at that time I was a professor there. I was a visiting professor for a while, although I taught at a different college. So as I'm passing him, he stops and he whispers to me in English. He says, "Better not to introduce me in such a big way," he says, "because I might disgrace you."
Oh, God.
In other words, that was his first big speech like that in America. And so he was pretending maybe he wouldn't give such a good talk. Of course, he gave a marvelous talk. That's where he started his thing about, "I'm not selling Buddhism here. I am representing the common human religion of kindness." That's where he really started that. And it was wonderful. And everybody, of course, really loved him, as everyone does, you know. But you know, he has always, so in a way, this is how our relationship. And this is why His Holiness so much cares about the Tibet houses. Even when I was a monk in Dharamsala, at that time, Chomo Geshe Rinpoche was the head of Tibet House in Jorbag.
Oh, okay.
The earlier Tibet House, not in Lodi Road, but near there in Jorbag. 13 drawback, I still remember. And he wanted me to go to Delhi, and he wanted me to write down the biography of the Trungpa Geshe, because Trungpa Geshe had been very tortured in Chinese prison camp and so he wanted me to make a book by that. But somehow it didn't happen, and then they sent me to Argentina, and then I got stuck back in New Jersey. But I almost did. But anyway, then once His Holiness started setting up different institutions, the Tibet House was he made a big fuss about it. He always would come to us every other year. And, he got Richard Gere to help us do it at first. But then Richard Gere himself liked to do political lobbying. He thought that culture preservation was for elderly ladies and not young ones, elderly ones. So he really loved doing with Lodi Rinpoche, Lodi Gali Rinpoche. He loved doing the lobbying type of thing. So that was his original interest, actually. People always do what they're really interested in.
You called...
And he left it to me, and I was very nervous at first, taking responsibility without his help, he moved to that. And I think Tibetans are sort of uncertain, really, why His Holiness is so focused on the Tibet houses in Barcelona, Frankfurt, New York. And he's asked me a number of times. We helped start the one in Mexico. And then he asked me to go to Buenos Aires. He asked me to go to Sao Paulo. But so far, and in Costa Rica, there's kind of an effort. But it's hard to get the Westerners to really make a good Tibet house. And His Holiness always wants it. But sometimes the Tibetan officials don't quite get it, because they have many Dharma centers and things. So why do we need a culture center? But I believe, I didn't articulate that in the old days, but lately I believe the reason His Holiness likes to see Tibet represented like that is because he doesn't want to be seen as trying to convert all the Christians and all the secularists. He wants to represent Buddhism without forcing people to be Buddhists, like a missionary. And I think that's wise of him, actually. It doesn't stop some other Lama from having Dharma center. That's legal in a religiously pluralistic, culture where there's not an official state religion. But so that's fine if people switch. But he always used to scold me, actually, from the beginning, even when I was a monk. He said, well, you were born a Christian. Your family was Christian, not very religious, though. They were sort of secular. But so don't be, negative about that.
Right.
If you can be Buddhist, but don't give up on the Christians and sort of. But we have something in the West we call Jubu,
Right.
where Jewish people are also Buddhists, but we don't have much in Chrisbu. So he was always used to encourage me kind of to be a Chrisbu, so that in other words you'd kind of not feel, the Christian wouldn't feel they lost you. And in a way, but they do anyway. They can't help themselves, kind of. Like I'm a friend of the Archpatriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Christianity.
Okay.
So he was a little nervous. We became friends. He said, well, you were baptized at least, now you're a Buddhist, but at least you were baptized. He said to me once. I said, yeah, right, I was, And then he said, and did you have your children baptized, So then I decided to take a chance. And I said, yes. And he said, which I didn't, actually, in the church. So but then he looked suspicious. And he said, who did the baptizing? And then I said, I did.
Oh. That's the interesting thing about other religion and Buddhism. To be a Buddhist, unless you are joining the monastic community, you don't have to go through rituals. For us, we were just born Buddhists.
Yes.
And we don't mind which tradition of or sect of Buddhism, whether it's Gelug or Kagyu, we go. As lay people, we are happy to receive teachings from anyone.
Right.
Whereas I see the Western Buddhists, so to say, like they said, I have taken a vow with this, and I'm not going to, let's say if you have taken a vow from a Kagyu Lama, then you're not going to go for a Kala Chakra for his, this is just an example.
Yes.
Why do you think that came about? When I first came to London, that's like the big difference I saw with people who've converted.
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, you see, that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three what they call Abrahamic religions, the reason they're like that is because they think if you lose that connection, you're going to be sent to hell. So, they don't think that God likes Buddhism. So the ones who are very more pious. The secular people don't mind, but the ones who are religious, they have this kind of fear that you're going to get in trouble by giving up Jesus or giving up Muhammad or giving up Judaism. Like I know some rabbis, and they say they don't mind that some of the Jews become Buddhists, as long as their feet are nailed to the floor of the synagogue.
Okay.
That's what they say. And actually, I sometimes give speech to rabbi. I once gave a famous speech in San Francisco there was like 30 rabbis there. And I said, rabbis, don't worry about the Jew Jews because they're still Jewish and we don't mind from Buddhist side, I said.
Yeah.
And I said, if somebody comes to the synagogue one Sunday and they say, I'm not a Jew boy anymore, Rabbi, I'm just a boo, then you can come and complain to His Holiness. Because His Holiness always says everybody should keep grandmother's religion in some cultural way, and then they can learn from other religions, that's fine, but they should keep a good connection to the birth religion, so to speak. And he tells the popes and people, please don't convert our Buddhists. He does say that.
So now that we've touched on this interfaith relationship and you being a cultural ambassador for Tibet with the Tibet House
So
activities.
informally, I don't consider myself any kind of formal ambassador.
Right, of course.
I really don't.
And you're also a professor of Buddhist studies.
Yes.
So I want to get an advice from you about how we can introduce a good or easy description of the concept of reincarnation. Because you see, at the moment, there's so much talk about reincarnation related to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama's succession. And there is a concern about Tibetans and Tibetan activists that how do we make it understandable?
Yes.
Because this reincarnation is a religious concept, and for us, it's politically linked very closely to our situation.
I think there are different ways of doing. I think that it depends on the circumstance a little bit. But actually, the way I approach it is I consider rebirth a scientific concept, not a religious concept, not just a superstition thing. There's a tremendous amount of evidence about people remembering previous lives. It's very documented all over the world, even in cultures where they don't have a formal reincarnation, even other Buddhist societies where they don't have tulku idea, in like Theravada Buddhists and so on. Or even in Mahayana, China or Japan, they don't have tulku, And they have concept of nirmanakaya, tulku, like emanation body, but they don't have a formal labra. They don't recognize someone directly, Even within Tibetan Buddhism, Maige Shiwanga, the Kalmics, Khalkha Mongolians have tulku, they Khalkha Jetsun Damba. But Kalmic Buddhists did not recognize official labran. They didn't keep labran because the Kudaks, the generals, the warlord of the Kalmyk, because they were out there nearby with the Russians and the militaries. So they never allowed a tulku institution, but they would recognize some exceptional person and put them in monastery, but they didn't have a formal labran. They did not. So that's circumstantial, that aspect. But the reincarnation thing, actually in history, even in the time of Jesus, it was pretty common in Europe, actually, what they called metempsychosis, that the mind would have another thing. And it was only sort of formally rejected in the 4th century in Christianity, for example. And in Judaism, they still talk about whether Rabbi so-and-so was reborn as Rabbi so-and-so, even today, in the Talmud, the Jewish scholars. But in Christianity, it was banned in the 4th century at the Council of Nicaea because they wanted people to feel that this life, you have to choose for Jesus, and you don't say, I didn't really do that this life, but I'll do next life. So they kind of banned it, actually. But banning it officially doesn't necessarily prevent a human being from becoming other kind of being. And then the question is, so therefore, that's on the sort of philosophical, scientific level. And that's something I don't completely agree with His Holiness. His Holiness always goes like, Nirvana is Buddhist business, reincarnation is Buddhist business, we're going to talk science, and I'm not going to talk about it. He does. He used to do that with the scientists. But actually, sometimes in Tibetan, he will launch into about the mind and but he doesn't push it at them, in other words. It's because he respects the materialists. I'm a little more critical of the materialists because, I say that, okay, you're going to be nothing. Why do you believe that you'll be nothing when you die? That your consciousness will cease? Where does it go? Or what happens? And luckily, even the secularist humanists, they believe they kind of continue through their children, they continue through their legacy. So they have some sort of notion of continuity. They just don't think personally they're going to have to get a new passport in a new country somewhere. So but it's not that alien to them, and it's become more familiar with it. So that's not a worry.
Okay.
As far as the Chinese communists, who are complete materialists and don't believe that they have a consciousness really, or a soul or a mind, that takes rebirth. For them to pretend they're going to, find the Toko, that's just being silly. It's stupid. And nobody really thinks that's important. And the Tibetans, they're not respecting in other words, if the communists want a puppet of a head Lama for Tibet, it's a stupid of them to claim that they are recognizing it. They have to have it officially recognized by lamas, or the Tibetan people won't really believe in that.
Of course, which
Therefore,
we've seen.
it doesn't work for them as a sort of surrogate person like Panchen Rinpoche, previous Panchen Rinpoche, 16, or whatever he was.
Yeah.
Not 16th, that's the Karmapa.
10th, yeah.
The 10th or whatever it was. The Panchen Rinpoche had some power with Tibetans after they let him out of prison, and he was able to kind of negotiate, and he found some statues that they didn't destroy, and he helped rebuild some few things. And so he was making them more happy than Tibetans. And actually, I believe Xi Jinping, which, if you know who Jin Wei is, did you ever hear of Jin Wei? Jin Wei, when Xi Jinping first came in, because his father was friendly with His Holiness in 1954.
Yes, that's what we have.
We all know that story, and we had a hope about him. But he did actually authorize one lady who was in the leadership school in Beijing about minority policy. And she did say publicly, and they published her interview, where she said, we should rehabilitate the Dalai Lama. Stop saying he's an evil, wolf in sheep's clothing, all these nasty things they say, because the rest of the world thinks that's ridiculous. He's so popular. He's a Nobel Prize winner. He's just as popular as, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie in the international popularity contest.
Or Uma Thurman, for that matter.
What?
Or Uma Thurman, for that
She's not
matter.
that famous. But I'm just saying he's very popular. So then that Jin Wei, she made that interview several times in 2013, and they were published in the official publications. And then several members of Standing Committee of Politburo went berserk about we can't do that and blah, blah, blah. And I have information, well, I'm not really very well informed politically and so forth, but I did hear from some people that the two members of the 7-person Standing Committee of Politburo, one of them was representing Deng family, and one was representing Jiang family. Hu Jintao apparently doesn't have a representative, but those two families are still, those have died, but they have a family representative. So they didn't want that their ancestor, their patriarch or something, had made mistake of demonizing Dalai Lama. It was bad policy, and they didn't want to admit that. But they didn't arrest that woman. They didn't kick her out of her job and all that. She stayed in the job. But then she did eventually leave and move to America. But she wasn't arrested or punished so I think that when Xi Jinping authorized her to make trial balloon, to see if he could get away from the stupidity, because it's, in fact, for China to continue to attack His Holiness is like a PR stupidity.
Absolutely.
Then they have to hire a PR company to try to pretend that they're nice. Instead, if they had reputation of being nice to Tibetan about the culture, I have one other woman, a great scholar named Diana Wolf, who is a Mongolian scholar, and she wrote a book called Don't Forget About Tibet or something. I forget what it was called, but in which she said Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, once they controlled the thing, then they did business. Then they didn't persecute the culture.
Yes. Yes.
They didn't try to homogenize the culture and genocide in a way.
Yeah, in fact, it happened the other way around. Now the Chinese
That's right.
communists wants to own the UN.
He let them have their own culture. In fact, I invented a word for what they do in Tibet, which is not an English word, but I make it a word. You know, they call it ethnic cleansing, but I like a word. I call it ethnocide.
Ethnocide.
Sort of, it's a kind of genocide.
Like genocide, ethnocide.
But it's ethnocide. You know, you could like leave the body there, but you try to change the mind. You eliminate the cultural identity. And I think it's a good word. I think we should put it in the dictionary, ethnocide.
Right.
Because a lot of people they're doing with Uyghur people.
Right.
The Chinese are, but then, you know, Russians trying to do to Ukrainian people. So I'm sorry, I know Buddhist nonviolence. And His Holiness never says anything. He's all nonviolence. And of course, I totally worship His Holiness. But I'm very supportive of Zelensky. I consider Zelensky a hero of Tibet, actually. Because in Buddhist nonviolence, and you know, the Bodhisattva, you know, Jiangchu Senpai Juyugi Do, which Samdo Rinpoche's favorite sutra, one of his favorite sutras. Buddhist nonviolence includes the ability to defend yourself from invasion of a bad king who has a genocidal intent in invading your country. If you have the military power to defend yourself, you should, because that will minimize the long-term violence. Although it will be, it's a battle to push them out. But if you don't have any military, you shouldn't. Then you have to be like Gandhi or something. You say, okay, because if you fight and fail, it causes more violence in the occupation, so to speak. You know, but then so in other words, Buddhist version of nonviolence is more practical. So the Ukrainians have the ability, they demonstrate to resist the Russian genocide. You know, the Moscovian, or I don't call them Russia, I call them Moscovia, the Moscovian Kremlin genocide that Putin tried to do on them. And, but Tibetans didn't. So in a way, His Holiness, although he admires Tushikandra Sokpa, you know, he never really, we must all do this, you know what I mean? He never came out to say that. He kind of, Gyaludendra did, and also some that they did. But he didn't, actually, His Holiness. He remained neutral about that, you know, because he didn't. I remember him once talking to Lasan Sering and some of the patrons. There was one, it's on YouTube, actually, you can find. And he's saying, okay, you want to fight? Where are we going to get the guns? Because nobody was giving them. The CIA gun, they gave some old gun, it didn't have a serial number. It was from Pakistan or something. East Pakistan, it didn't shoot well. It wasn't an AR-15. It wasn't a decent weapon because it was half-hearted, you know. And His Holiness knew that, I think. I mean, this might be controversial. We could discuss it for your audience. But I think the greatness of His Holiness nonviolence, in spite of his admiration for the heroism, but it's like the thing about the people who immolate their body. Westerners say self-immolate, but the Tibetan doesn't say self, because self goes on in another life. But the body, you give the body, but which we didn't have in Tibetan Buddhism because of Tantra, but they did have in Chinese Buddhism and Vietnamese Buddhism and other Buddhisms, you know, the body immolation they have, you know. So you can, so in a way, that's kind of Buddhist, that's a Buddhist warrior. That's a Tibetan Buddhist warrior.
Okay.
That His Holiness admires, but he can't say, oh, everybody should do that. He will not say that. You know, communists will try to pretend he's telling them to do that, but he does not. Right. So it's very subtle.
Can we now go on to another interesting reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama? The sixth Dalai Lama, about which you have co-authored a book.
Yes.
Tell us about it. Tell us about him.
I hope everybody will read it who reads in English.
I will.
I think it's a lot of fun, and His Holiness encouraged me to write it. I think the office, they got a little nervous about it because the thing about the tongue the Chinese did,
Oh, right. Yeah.
What the grandfather's saying, so they're all jumpy about it. And they think it's a present, but he's 90 years old. I asked him, I said, Your Holiness, do you mind if I make historical novel about Tanya Gyatso? And he said, No, that's great, you do that. And then he said, Do you know Pendant Lama saved his life? And then he went on and he taught 40 years more in Mongolia. And do you have that book? And he told Chupten Jimbala, he said, Get him that book in Tibetan, So, but which he didn't actually. He forgot to give it to me and I forgot it. But I read it later because some English guy translated it actually. Wickham Smith translated the further life of Sixth Dalai Lama. But His Holiness identified with him. Sixth Dalai Lama left Tibet at 24. His Holiness left Tibet at 24. Sixth Dalai Lama left because he couldn't function to help his people effectively with the Lhasa Khan and with the Mongolian and Manchu fighting and the difficulties in Tibet in late 17th century, around 1700. And then Lhasa Khan tried to kill him, And then he went on and he did great work amongst Mongolians. And he helped the Dharma, and in that way he helped continue trying to pacify the Mongolians who were still having their warlords, And so His Holiness has to pacify whole world to help Tibet. The 14th, great 14th. The 6th, then he became invisible, and of course modern Western people don't believe that he survived. Your English scholar doesn't believe that, but actually I believe that. His Holiness believed that, and I think a lot of Tibetans do believe that. I don't know, maybe more modernized ones don't, but I do definitely believe that.
I think we're looking for more evidence. I think that's what, because I would personally want to believe that he went on to live and do the things that the Dalai Lamas, have.
Well, you have to have, what kind of evidence, like Western people think that Buddha didn't teach Mahayana, that Nagarjuna invented it and pretended Buddha taught it. They have a rather rude interpretation of Tibetan own belief about their own history. And I don't agree with them. And I don't think they have evidence against Nagarjuna, actually. They don't really know. But in their view, miracle is not possible. But in our view, life itself is a miracle.
True. I think we are running short of time, and I want to ask you this last question. I think someone like you who's had close relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, lots of Tibetan masters, Tibetan political leaders, and a professor of Buddhist studies. What is your take on the succession of His Holiness the Dalai Lama? It's a hot topic, especially this year it's been. How do you see it unfolding and the subtext of what it means for the Tibetans? I think that's not so much out there. I think the discussion so far is more on the geopolitics of this issue. But for the Tibetans, it means a whole lot more, the person of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Like I remember my own mother. For her, it was like, I don't want to live to see His Holiness passed away. It's like, I want to die before His Holiness passed away, because my family can then go to His Holiness and ask for his blessings for a good birth. And she wanted to have a last meeting with His Holiness before she passed away. And
did she pass away now?
Yes, that happened. So it's like that. It's more than life itself. It's so much more, the spiritual, the religious.
It's very simple, really. It's very, very simple. Imagine how Christians would be if they felt that God could have more than one son in one time, in one place, and they can have 3 or 4 children. How come God can't? God is omnipotent, they think. How come He can't have a few more children, even a daughter, perhaps? Reverend Moon in Korea, they were very angry about Reverend Moon because he thought maybe there were more children of God than just Jesus. They didn't put the whole job of saving humanity on just one person. So our notion of choku, the Mahayana Buddhist, not just Tibetan, but Mahayana Buddhist notion of the emanation body, Nirmanakaya, is that enlightened being can manifest many savior beings. So his Chenesig is like Jesus for Tibetans. And so naturally, and they think he keeps coming back. You know, in America now, we have what's called Christian nationalism, where they don't want to have separation of church and state. And they want America to be a Christian nation. And therefore, they want Pentagon to be Christian soldier. And actually, they're crazy, in my opinion. But they think when Jesus comes back, they have a prophecy, like a Shambhala type prophecy. And then everybody who isn't Christian gets killed, which is kind of crazy, you know. And so I think, you know, and I think that it's not necessary. They could have a different kind of theology where they would have more Jesuses, you know. Main point is Tibetans have more Jesuses because His Holiness is like living Jesus for Tibetan. So their faith in life and their faith in the goodness of human beings, possible goodness, and love and compassion, you know, Tonyin Yingji Nimbochen, you know, this Tibetan idea of Tonyin Yingji Nimbochen connects to the living Chenesing. And even Karmapa is also Chenesing. That's not just His Holiness. Karmapa is also Chenesing. And there are many Loche Rinpoche, this Loche Rinpoche might be Dharma. And there are many living Dharmas. Okay? And so the Tibetan point of view is like that, which is a good point of view, actually. And you know, it's not necessary that poor Jesus has to do all the work for Donald Trump and other kind of unpleasant people who are nasty to other people and are not ethical, and they don't follow the commandment of God of not killing and not stealing and not sexual abuse and so forth. So Tibetans, this is the greatness of Tibetan culture, is that they have a theology. You could make a theology that only Dalai Lama is this and only the first Dalai Lama, and since then nobody, and we're waiting for him to come back, and then the army of Shambhala will come and kill everybody. We could make a version like that, but they didn't do that. And the Indians didn't do that. And Indians even got to think maybe Chenesig could go live in Tibet and be called Chenesig rather than Avalokiteshvara, which is quite hard to pronounce. You know? And so that's a good thing about Tibetan culture. And it's not that we expect other people to be Tibetan, but they can imitate and make their own culture a little less exclusivist. And then they could maybe decide, you know, like when they went to America, the English and the Spanish and the French, and they said, you know, God is behind us, and so we can kill all the native people. And I don't think Jesus liked that. He said, don't kill people. So, you know, in other words, that's not Jesus who did that. That is the particular type of interpretation by some king who wanted to act like he wanted his people to be willing to die to destroy somebody else, and there's he wanted to have a religious legitimation of his political authoritarianism, and you know, His Holiness wanted democracy. He doesn't want to be dictator. You know?
Absolutely.
And Tibetan people wanted him to, and the Kashak said, no, we need Dalai Lama. I have to admit, I argued with His Holiness. I argued with him. I said, no, the Tibetans fight with each other. They need you to help them make decisions. He says, no, I want them to learn how to be a loyal opposition, he said. So we had a debate about it, and His Holiness won the debate. And how did he win the debate? He told me, cut them.
Oh, okay. That was very good, yeah. I think...
Cut them. He says, don't go giving ideas to Tibetans about making me dictator.
I think that's sort of...
In next life.
Right.
He said, just cut them. Shut up.
So I think you've...
This is our relationship. On the other hand, I bow to his feet.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you know, I can disagree with him.
I think that's why we need, you know, when the 15th comes, we need many manifestations of His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
That's it.
And you have, from what you have said, it's like clear why His Holiness is so different. He didn't want power. he wanted to democratize
Yes,
people. And
he
also,
was so happy in
he just,
2011 when he retired. And he said, I've been feeling like hypocrite. In English, he said, all the time I'm talking democracy, democracy, and then meanwhile I'm making all decisions. I'm appointing prime minister and so forth. Now you have to fight it out, Now you have to do the thing, and you have to have loyal opposition. If you lose the election, you have to join in the majority and govern. What has gone wrong in America is Republicans stop being loyal opposition, and they think politics is war. And you never stop attacking, and then you don't govern as a minority. And then you can't have democracy when they do it like that. And this is good British system, actually.
yes,
I like
very
that.
pleased to be here in this country.
Imagine the way it is in House of Commons. If Donald Trump had to go in the House of Representatives, and people on the back bench could shout and scream at him, he's a fool, then he would have to develop a more flexible, empathetic. He would have to see that how to be popular, and this would change the majoritarian way of democracy. And so that's again another thing. That's British art better than Americans about that.
You think so? Okay,
Definitely,
thank you.
they wouldn't have this trouble, so far.
Thank you.
Even they do have their own version of Fox News. They still Starmer and Bojo, and they couldn't go like Trump.
Right.
And they have King Charles over there.
Right. Yes, it's very dignified monarch.
No, I like the British system.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a New Yorker. We rebelled, but on the other hand, the parliamentary system is good.
Thank you. I'm a proud Tibetan, but I'm very happy to be part of the British citizenship as well.
I'm very happy there's a nice Tibetan community.
Yes, thank
you.
It's small, but we formed of people who have been educated here. The early days,
Yes.
Pestalozzi Children's Village took Tibetan children here to study, and then the later comers were more like nurses.
Yes.
So it's a very much contributing community to the British society here.
Yes.
One last question. I don't think
Yes.
I can walk away without asking this question.
Okay, what's that?
How about a female Dalai Lama? What do you think?
I think it's great. I'm telling you, this is Loche Rinpoche Nyebati. There's another Loche Rinpoche over there. Loche Rinpoche was my teacher. I'm so happy I can remember the name, Loche Rinpoche. And the female Dalai Lama would be fantastic. But I noticed when His Holiness said that, some of the male people in the entourage, Tibetans, looked very nervous. But I think Tibetan ladies might have liked that. I hope so.
Yes.
Because, it is definitely the case that nowadays, Me Too, we have it in America, but now there's big backlash against Me Too. But I think when Epstein papers come out, it will be over. And in America, possibly. That way we will escape from this dictatorship that they're trying to do down there. But the women have to speak up. And His Holiness's reasoning is correct. When you have a crisis, male tendency is to be aggressive. And then you have war, like the stupid Putin, or in Israel, this nonsense. And when a female, the neurotransmitter in a crisis is oxytocin. And oxytocin makes the female decide, oh, who is an ally? How can we discuss it? Let's not have a fight. And I remember, I have a theory actually about Buddha's change of Indian society. Shakyamuni Buddha, that he was what I call cool revolutionary, and not hot one. Hot revolutionary changes the regime, but then the new one is worse than the old one, the new king, when they do a hot change. Cool change is where people's culture changes gradually. And then someone asked me, who is the cool revolutionaries in history? And at first, is it only Gandhi and Dalai Lama, like Martin Luther King, like a few nonviolence people? And I was thinking. Then I suddenly realized, I thought about my own mother. I thought about my wife. I have 3 sons. I was the one of 3 boys. The males of a family will have fights. And who gets in the middle of the fight? The female. Oh, no, dear, don't say that. You didn't mean you hate so-and-so. No, you really love each other. No, let's not have a fight. And sometimes she gets hit in the middle if the boys are even fighting. If they may drank some liquor or something, and she's the cool hero. In other words, she stays calm and she tries to figure out what's the conflict and make a negotiation and avoid violence.
Quiet heroism.
So in that case, the cool heroes are 50% of the planet.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
But they have to assert themselves. They can't say, yes, dear, go kill somebody. They have to say, no, think to have a dialogue. Think about it. So we need Mrs. Xi Jinping to have something to say about the treatment of the Tibetans. We need Mrs. Mao, but Ms. Mao lost. When you get dictator, they don't listen to the women, and then they have big harem, and they just have girlfriends, because they don't have someone who can be critical about their behavior. So I think His Holiness saying that, actually, if I'm not so perfect myself, I'm also a male chauvinist, but he's agreeing there with my wife, who is my guru in a family way. She's my guru.
Oh, that's nice.
How the man has to learn to listen. Are you married?
Yes.
So I hope your husband listens to Locher Rinpoche.
I'll tell him that.
Oh, good. Please do. Please do. And tell him that His Holiness is saying that by saying he might be a woman next life. Right. And there's very few women tulkus. Right. So many male tulkus. Yeah. Because Tibetans were warrior, male chauvinists, warrior people, macho, And so in Japan, when the shogun in Japan, in the time of 6th Dalai Lama, actually, same time, 5th and 6th Dalai Lama, when they stopped the warlord fighting with each other, the Kutaks killing each other with the samurai, they took the samurai and they put them in monasteries. Oh. So now and they made them stare at the wall. So they said, now you beat your own head against the wall until you become wise and compassionate. And don't go beat each other in the wall and kill each other all the time. Right. So the monastery is a way of calming down the warriors. So they become conquering themselves.
Absolutely. I think the monasteries do a great service. And in fact, I see the monks looking after the little novice monks like a parent. They are like,
yes.
Without getting married, they are doing the work of a parent,
yes.
and very successfully as well.
Yes, I agree, absolutely.
Eyes.
I think that's true. That is true. But on the other hand, sometimes, you have doctors,
Right.
and doctors are like world wrestling champion, a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Thurman. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
And there's so much more to talk, but unfortunately,
I know.
time is the
constraint.
constraint.
I'm promoting you as Locher Rinpoche.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any last words for the Tibetans or anybody you want to say?
Well, yes, my last words for Tibetans is this. I do have last word for Tibetan, and that is, young one, especially, don't give up hope. It looks like lost cause, of course, and many Western people think it is, but it's not just because His Holiness is worldwide popular. It's also because the information age on the planet, and Facebook and Instagram and this kind of thing, the low-class people, they can see what King Charles has for dinner in Instagram. And so everybody knows everything. So the oppressiveness of the conquering colonialist power is obsolete, actually. And, because of the ecology, because of information age, because of the network of people knowing about each other, the sort of regional ecological politics will occur. And unfortunately, people who live at sea level in Beijing and Shanghai, they do not know how to take care of Tibetan Plateau. And they will be melting those glaciers way too fast. And they can drain some water temporarily with a dam, but then they will dry up those water. and they will not have water, and they will ruin their society, actually. So the local self-control of people, local autonomy everywhere, like autonomy of Ukraine, autonomy of Turkestan, autonomy of Tibet, even North and South China, Shanghai and Beijing and Manchukuo and Harbin, they will be more local. And you won't have this kind of colonial central capital making stupid decisions in another country. For example, in Lhasa today, the sun doesn't rise till 10 a.m. because they insist that you have to be on Beijing time in like 5 time zones away. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's just stupid. It's like California would have to be on New York time, and therefore the sun is all disorganized with the clock. So this is the trend of history that is inalterable. And so Tibet will definitely be free. And then your culture will be admired, even by Chinese, like a jewel of how to live better and be more happy. And Locho Rinpoche can also be Mrs. Locho Rinpoche, as well as Rinpoche Locho Rinpoche, monk, monastic Locho Rinpoche. That can happen. So don't give up hope and learn your Tibetan. And Lama la jiao su qiu, Sanje la jiao su qiu, Che la jiao su qiu, Gen la jiao su qiu. And that is not something backward and superstitious and whatever. It's realistic. The Buddha Dharma is based on reality, not based on just some superstition. So don't give up hope is the key. Of course, His Holiness is telling you all the time. And I'm one Inji also saying so. You know, I'm American, but you call me Inji, but that's okay. All right? So Tuji Che. And I feel very blessed to have encountered Tibet and to have encountered His Holiness and lots of different geisha-las and Rinpoches, and also Locher Rinpoche, Tibetan women and so forth. But I was monk in those days, so I didn't really fully encounter Tibetan women. But I like them, I admire them. Rinchen Khandala, for example, she's been spending lifetime controlling the Choyu Tenzin Chogyal.
And the nun
Quite a job.
work with the nuns.
Big job. What?
Rinche Khandala's work with the nuns.
I know, fantastic. And then the geisha mas are coming. Geisha la, look out. Those geisha mas are going to be smart.
She's the poster girl for us.
They will do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much.